Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to USTA Florida's Here to Serve podcast. My name is Laura Bowen, and I'm the Executive Director at USTA Florida. And today we have a very special episode focusing on the health benefits of tennis. I couldn't ask for a better guest today than Dr. Brian Hainline, who happens to be USTA's chairman of the board, and he also is the Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer of the NCAA. So we're excited to have you with us. Dr. Hainline, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Well, thanks, Laura. I appreciate the opportunity and look forward to really having a dialogue with you and with our Florida members.
Well, before we dive into our topic, which I know we're going to get into some great discussions there, I'd love to have you share a little bit about yourself. And first up, I'd love to hear when you first fell in love with tennis.
Oh, geez. So I remember playing tennis in first grade and really loved it. I played all sorts of sports growing up, but tennis had kind of a special place in my life because everyone in our family played tennis. In fact, fast forward in '74, we were the USTA Tennis Family of the Year. So we were all really engaged. But I remember another special moment. It actually happened in Florida. I was visiting my uncle, and he wanted to take me to see a tennis match. And again, I was around first grade, and I saw Pancho Gonzalez play. And I said, geez, this is a towering giant. And I've never seen an athlete up close like that. And he kind of became a hero for me. So just playing and seeing Pancho all around the first grade time. And then I just increasingly fell in love with the sport.
And you've been playing ever since, which is a benefit to us for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's pretty cool. So I have been playing all along and even playing pretty regularly now. So it's great.
Well, we're great to have you, obviously, as a tennis player, but you also happen to be a doctor. And I'm curious, when did you first think you might want to become a doctor? And, what was it that motivated you to get into that field?
Yeah, it didn't come early. I mean, quite honestly, I grew up convinced I was going to be a priest.
Okay.
We came from a very Catholic family, and that seemed like the noble thing to do. But in college, I was studying philosophy, and I took a year studying Carl Jung, a psychiatrist, kind of a weird psychiatrist. And I said, geez, I think I'm going to go to medical school because I wanted to be a psychiatrist, just like Carl Jung. Um, and so, I had thoughts here and there, but it really crystallized for me in college. And then I did get to medical school, realized I didn't want to be a psychiatrist. That was sort of right at the heart of the pharmacologic revolution. And it seemed to me that we were treating the human brain and mind like it was a beaker.
Mhm.
And neurology was just really starting to open up and explode in terms of understanding the brain. And so, yeah, it all crystallized. And then in medical school, I said, yeah, I want to be a neurologist. So that's kind of how it happened.
I'm excited that you chose that field. I have a college roommate who chose that same field. She's actually at NYU, and she is a neurologist, and it's such a fascinating field of study because so much of it is process of elimination, right? It's like you have to rule out things to figure out what is wrong with people. And I love hearing her stories every time we get together in New York about the challenges that she has with treating the different patients in that field. So
Well, I have to meet her because I don't know if you know, but once a week I teach at NYU. So I'm on faculty in the neurology
to have
department.
the two of you meet. You might have met before, and I don't even know it. Shout out to Dr. Dina Gazzola, who's at NYU in the neurology department. And so would love for the two of you to meet the next time that you're up there.
Great.
Awesome. So my next question about you is how were you able to combine your love of tennis with, your medical profession? You've had some interesting roles that have allowed you to kind of tackle both. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so So first, my love of tennis, outside of family, I mean, that's just what drives a lot of my life. And in many ways, I think I owe my life to tennis. It's just it's so integral and played an important part even in during very challenging times of my life. Um, but I remember it was around 1989, and Dr. Irving Glick was the tournament doctor for the US Open, and he asked if I wouldn't mind coming out and just sort of trailing him a little bit, and if there were neurological problems, maybe I could help him evaluate them in players. And fast forward a few years, in 1992, I became chief medical officer of the US Open, and that was for 16 years. And it was just really a phenomenal opportunity, not just because of my love for tennis, but working with the players and really getting to know them. And I'll say, especially behind the scenes, working with the WTA Tour, I came to realize that the WTA Tour, and I'll just say this point blank, more than any other sporting organization in the world, is so far ahead in terms of just thinking about the athlete from a holistic point of view. And so, and the ATP Tour is they've been catching up. But just having that opportunity was really great. And then, even in my current role as chair of the board and president, one of the things that I see is maybe perhaps the most important thing I can do is just talk about tennis and medicine from another point of view, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but that tennis is maybe the healthiest sport on this planet. So it's really been this opportunity to work directly and then to help with the messaging. And it's just been a great opportunity to combine my two passions like that.
Well, you made a great segue to my next question that we have today. February happens to be Heart Health Month, and it seems only fair that we talk today about how tennis can help us all stay healthy. I know there have been a number of studies that have been published showing that tennis is really key to a longer, healthier life. And I know you talked a lot about that when we met in January. Could you share with our audience more about that and what it is that makes tennis so special and unique from a physical health perspective?
Yeah, so there were two large studies, one with about 50,000 people and another with about 10,000, and they were multi-year studies, going over 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And one study looked at tennis and other racket sports. So it was tennis, badminton, and squash. And the other looked just at tennis. And both of them found conclusively that when you compare tennis to all of the other traditional sports or to things like going in a gym and doing an aerobics class or going out for a jog or doing a step class, that tennis, from a statistically significant point of view, provided more cardiovascular protective effects. So meaning that it was the healthiest exercise for the heart, and that the likelihood of developing a cardiovascular disease, such as a heart attack or a stroke, was much less likely if you played tennis. But even more, the longevity for those who played tennis was several years more compared to all the other sports. And imagine like having a pill and saying, hey, if you take this pill, your cardiovascular risk factor is going to go way down, or you're going to live several years longer. I mean, you have
We
that pill and
take
you're
it.
going to win
Yeah.
the Nobel Prize. But
Yeah.
but we have that pill. It's the sport of tennis. So and that's the physical benefits, but also the mental benefits of tennis are phenomenal as well. And you might ask the question why, and I don't think it's just because of how tennis is. So I'm going to get a little specific here. Um, but there's something called aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So
Okay.
what aerobic means is that it's like going for a long swim or a long jog, that the way your body is renewing its energy so you can do that is by bringing in oxygen, and the oxygen gets, processed into energy. Anaerobic means that you're not using the oxygen, that whatever's
Mhm.
stored in your body, that's it. So what's a classic aerobic? A marathon. What's a classic anaerobic? 100-yard sprint.
Okay.
So if you look at tennis, it's actually a combination. You have to have an incredible aerobic threshold background, but all the sports, I mean, all of the points are anaerobic. They all last between 5 and 8 seconds. It's a short burst. You're boom, boom, boom. So it's this magic combination of aerobic, anaerobic, and then it's a lot of things that human beings, over the, many, many, even hundreds of thousands of years, things that we've been doing. It's like throwing. It's like digging. It's, like doing a quick sprint, but then it's also having the endurance to be doing something for a long period of time. So you add that physicality measure and then add the social factor. How cool is it after tennis? Usually you just don't like kind of go home right away. There's we socialize, maybe sit down, have a snack, or analyze your game and the whole thing about it. So and socializing is such an important factor in health. It's like the opposite of loneliness.
Yeah.
And we know loneliness is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease and for mental health disease. So tennis is like a great antidote for so many of life's issues.
It's so true. And, I know my next question I'm going to ask you is about the pandemic. And I was reading a lot during the pandemic about remote work versus in-person work and the fact that we were all sort of in this lonely, isolated space during the pandemic. And while it felt like we wanted to stay at home because it was safe, that actually the opposite, the best thing we could do for our mental health was actually to get out there and to be around people. So it really resonates what you're saying about the social component being so valuable in addition to the physical component of tennis. And going off of that, as it turns out, during the pandemic, there seemed to be this epiphany among the general public that tennis was this sport that was so attractive to people during that time. Can you talk a little bit about the growth that we've seen in the sport since 2020 and maybe why that is?
Yeah, so the growth has been phenomenal and it's continuing, and that's relative to other sports, but just comparing tennis to what it was in 2017, 18. The pandemic was very interesting, Laura, because at first we were just so frightened and going to the grocery store with rubber gloves and bringing vegetables home and washing them with
Wiping them
soap. I
off.
mean, oh geez, oh Pete's. Because we didn't know really how COVID was transmitted. So, and ultimately we found that it was not a droplet spread. So it wasn't going to be from surface contamination, but it was more aerosol. But even thinking it was a droplet spread, so we were racking our brains out and saying, hey, tennis is the perfect sport. Because, but some people, we got a little crazy about how you would only touch your own balls and you wouldn't touch the opponent's balls. And then there were some reporters on TV who were talking about, not touching, your opponent's balls, and it kind of sometimes went off the wrong way, and it became
It does sound a little funny when you say
rather
it.
comical.
Yeah.
But it sort of broke that spell of doom. And it wasn't just because tennis could be played safely in COVID, but then once there was this out, they said, God, tennis is really a lot of fun. And then of course, where could you play? Because a lot of the clubs were closed, but you could go to the public parks
Right.
and that's what we want. Every person in the country to be playing tennis in a public park. So that was a big part of it. But I think also just when you take what you've done and with your leadership at USTA Florida, just the messaging that you do and so constantly and so well and people start understanding that it really is a cool sport. And so I think it was just a magic combination of COVID and then people understanding that it's great. But I'll go one step further. I think the messaging is starting to get out there about how tennis is really a healthy sport.
Yeah.
And if we could make it an equal access sport from a public health point of view, hands down, I mean, it's going to continue to grow exponentially.
I think that's a great point. And, we try very hard to showcase players of all ages and ability. People always come up to me and say, "Oh, you must be a great tennis player. You work at the USTA." And I say, "Nope, I am a beginner, intermediate, average tennis player. I'm just like you. And I didn't really start picking up a racket until later in life, and you can too." And I think that messaging is so important, that you see people of all walks of life playing. And I think USTA is doing a great job at showcasing that more, even in our imagery and our messaging going forward.
Yeah, and just on that one point, and you mentioned a great point, and I think it gets lost sometimes across our country that, you can start tennis at age 80,
Mhm.
and it doesn't have to be with a full court and a yellow ball. It could be with a red ball, and it gets you moving, and it has an infinite number of greater possible strokes than, say, pickleball. Um, but the point being that it really is an opportunity for anyone to engage at any age and of any ability or disability. And I think tennis does a great job with that as well.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I have to say I give credit to my mom, who's about 70, and she plays tennis 4 times a week, but she plays orange ball social tennis on a 60-foot court, and she brings in 50 to 60 players a month. She lives in a large retirement community and runs it very similar to pickleball. You just come in and you put your racket in and you rotate around, and so the social aspect is really why people come out, but they also are healthy and they're able to play in a way that's, safe and enjoyable. So I think that message that you just said about you don't have to play with a yellow ball. It can really be played in a lot of ways for people of all ages and abilities. She reminds me of that regularly, and she can still beat me on a 60-foot orange ball tennis court.
Well, I have an idea. I want to plant a seed, Laura, is
Okay.
that we take a video of your mother and her group on
Okay.
Orange Ball, and we show it at the annual meeting and maybe have you just speak to that.
Okay, awesome. I'm sure she would love to do that. So I'll
I
certainly
mean,
work on that.
what a cool story.
Yeah, she's definitely a cool lady, and she's been doing it for over 10 years, and she's done an incredible job. She, to me, is what a volunteer really brings to our association. So I'm super proud of her. Um, okay, let's talk a little bit about another aspect of safety of tennis. I know you've done an incredible amount of research around head injuries in sports, right? And when you look at that research, does that add to the idea that tennis is an ideal sport in terms of safety for both adults, but also for youth? And should we be telling that message a little bit more as well?
Yeah, I will say that's a tricky question. Um, so yes, so at the NCAA, we've actually partnered with the Department of Defense, and we're doing a 25 plus year study on concussion, head impact exposure, and ultimately brain health.
Mhm.
And so it's an interesting question. If you've had a few concussions, does that impact brain health? And it may or may not. And head impact exposure, we don't know. Certainly, what we do believe is that repetitive brain injuries are not good for brain health and may even lead to neurological disease. So there's that. But I kind of look at youth sport maybe as an all-inclusive thing. A dream for me is that tennis is able not only to promote itself, but to promote all of youth sport.
Hmm.
And so just behind the scenes, and you probably don't know this, but I work very closely with USA Football.
Okay.
So they're the governing body of youth football, all the way to high school. And so I was chair of a task force that developed USA Football's American Development Model. So what does it mean to do things that are developmentally appropriate? So it's probably not developmentally appropriate for an 8-year-old who can barely control his or her head to put a helmet on that
All
head.
right.
Um, And so they rolled out, and I hate to say this because USTA has an incredible American development model. I think USA football is the best.
Okay.
And it's not just because I was involved with it. I just surrounded myself by people a lot smarter than me, and we put it together. So you think about promoting tennis and promoting sport in the ideal world, especially for a 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 8-year-old, 10-year-old, they're playing multiple sports.
Mhm.
And I would like to focus on tennis being the model sport and ultimately the healthiest sport, but promoting all sports from a public health point of view. And so even at a large public park facility, and we're actually going to do a pilot with this, is to work with USA Football and have every football player learn to play tennis,
Oh, that'd be awesome.
and vice versa. You may know that girls flag football is perhaps the fastest growing sport and is
I
on
did
track to
hear that.
becoming, it's going to be an Olympic sport. Um, so uh, I kind of did a little sidestep around your question. I'm not inclined to, um, well, I don't want to downplay the greatness of other sports because I think they all offer something great. I think we can justifiably say, look, tennis is the healthiest sport out there. But I would love, kind of repeating myself, but just to at the same time we're promoting all sports, and tennis becomes the leader. And I'll end with this thought that I started off by saying that the NCAA and Department of Defense are working together. Well, the Department of Defense is very concerned about the physical literacy of our country
Mm-hmm.
because only 10% of high school students are physically literate enough to serve in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And physical illiteracy, so what does physical literacy mean? It means they have the ability and the drive and the competence to be physically active for life. And when you don't have that literacy, kind of like reading literacy or science literacy, it actually not only means you can't serve our country, which is a national defense issue, it means you have a much higher likelihood of developing cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, that you're much more likely to be a substance misuse individual or an alcoholic, and you're much more likely to drop out of the workforce and have poor academic performance. So sport is the magic bullet. And yeah, I mean, I think we believe and understand that tennis is the greatest. But getting everyone out there for sport, and for kids, I think they should be multi-sport anyway. That's, and before puberty, that's just the way to go.
I love hearing you say that answer. By the way, I have no preconceived notions on the answers. I'm like genuinely fascinated by the perspective that you have. And what I love about that answer is for National Girls and Women's in Sports Day, I started writing down all of the sports that I've played, and particularly that I played as a young girl. And there's probably 6 or 7 that I played, everything from gymnastics, we had a basketball hoop outside of my house, we swam, we did everything as kids, and to your point, I have a niece and 2 nephews, and they don't do any of those things, so it really has been a shift generationally from one generation to the other, so that doesn't surprise me, and I think anything we can do as a sport to encourage anyone to play a sport, and particularly kids, it's going to set them up for more success. And I feel like it's been such a big impact on my life to be healthy as an adult and to continue to exercise. It disappoints me that my niece and my nephews haven't had that opportunity, and they probably are less likely to pick something up later in life. So hopefully we can all move that needle together, and having girls play football is fascinating to me, so I can't wait to see that maybe in the Olympics next time around.
Yeah.
I want to talk about mental health a little bit. You touched on it earlier. For recreational adult players like me, I know exercise and tennis are such a big part of our mental well-being. We talk about it a lot. We're working all day, stressful things happen. Getting out and being physically active can really help. Can you talk a little bit about that? And maybe, I think you touched on this previously at our leadership meeting, what it is about tennis that also helps keep your brain sharp as a sport?
Yeah, so what's really interesting, so there's a condition called depression, anxiety, and there are medications that are commonly given for that. Sort of the new generation began with Prozac, and then you have Celexa, Zoloft, and Effexor, all sorts of drugs. If you compare their effects on improving depression, it's similar to beginning a regular exercise program. Again, talk about bottling that and making it into a pill. If we look at, we've done this study at the NCAA, and we compared student athletes to their counterparts, students who are not athletes. And student athletes across the board are more protected against depression and anxiety than those who are not athletes. And so just in general, one might ask why. And if you look at sport and being on a team, so first of all, you're in a supportive environment, ideally. And when you play sport, you're not always going to win. So you actually learn how to lose. When you fall down, you learn how to pick yourself up. You're very goal oriented. And when we look at all of the things that can impact depression and anxiety, the antidote to so much of it is being in a social environment where you are goal oriented and you are flexible so that when something bad happens, you can still pick yourself up. And so that's almost from like a cognitive behavioral point of view. Those were important things. But then when we look at the brain, and so there's something called plasticity. So what plasticity means in the brain is that the brain is continuing to develop and to reshape. And exercise actually improves the ability of the brain to be plastic, to continue to be flexible and to shape so you don't get into a rigid pattern. And it also is the fact that exercise, it improves certain growth factors in the brain that are important for the way the signals come about in the brain, but also for the vasculature of the brain, the circulation. So you can make these measurements in exercise and you actually see that the brain is being remodeled as a result. So you take these sorts of external issues outside of you, being goal-oriented, learning how to fall down, pick yourself up, this and that, and you take what actually happens in the brain, and then you look at the effect of exercise versus an antidepressant. All of that speaks to why exercise is so important for mental health. But there's a downside too, and with any sport and with kids, I think when our focus is on something other than the journey. So if the focus is just on winning, or a child does poorly in a match and the parent yells at the child, or the parent is living vicariously through the child, or getting back to what I said earlier about the WTA tour, when they put together the age eligibility rule in the 90s, and people were kind of upset. They said, the WTA is preventing 13 and 14-year-olds from playing and this and that. Do you know why they originally did that? Because they saw the dangers of what was happening when 13 and 14-year-old girls were traveling around the world and people were living vicariously through them and much worse. And so they had the foresight for that. So, it's also, why would we want our kids to be in sport, or anyone to be in sport? And a lot of it is you become a better athlete, a better human being, and you're engaging in something fun. But if the endpoints are always set about winning or being the best, that can have a negative impact on your mental health. And parents need to understand that. Parents need to understand that what they love to do is to compare, but what kids really want to do is to compete, and they just want to go out and do it their way. So so there's that whole story, and then there was the story of Naomi Osaka. She became public about her mental health struggles during the French Open in 2021. And And the tennis community worldwide responded in a very positive way. So the 7 governing bodies of tennis, so the 4 Grand Slams, so the Roland Garros, Wimbledon, the Australian Open, US Open, then the ATP and WTA tours, and then the International Tennis Federation, they all came together during last year's US Open and held an international summit on mental health and tennis. And it just produced incredible foundational principles that we're in the process of socializing. So tennis not only for all those reasons can help improve mental health, but tennis is sort of taking a leadership role in sport in terms of, understanding what we need to put in place to safeguard against things that could negatively impact mental health as well. So it's, pretty much a long-winded answer there, but it's so exciting because there's so much great stuff happening, and it's especially exciting for me and you, because the sport we love and we're involved in promoting. We're seeing that tennis is taking such a leadership role.
I'm so glad that you really mentioned that piece of it and particularly touched on the parent part. We've done a podcast before with Dr. Larry Lauer, and he's offered so many insights in terms of like parent behaviors, the impact on the athletes psychologically. And so I'm curious, you've seen this play out. You mentioned, your role for 16 years with USTA as the chief medical officer, getting to know the athletes. What is some advice that you might give to parents and or the young players, right, who might be performing at a high level and find themselves in that situation where they might be questioning their mental health and its effect that it's having on them? Is there advice that you could give to those players and parents to help them identify when that's happening and what they can do to address it?
Yeah, so the first advice is tongue in cheek. When we were studying a bunch of sports and trying to figure out why lacrosse was growing and with such popularity, and I actually showed this video. It was a video of parents at a baseball game, and the fathers, yelling at the umpire. It was videos of parents at a hockey game, and the fathers were in a fist fight with each other.
Mhm.
And at a soccer game, they were yelling at the kids. At a tennis match, they were berating the kids. And then they showed lacrosse, and none of the parents understood how to play lacrosse. And they were all on the sidelines having hamburgers and drinking beer, and the kids were having a great time. So, it's a little tongue in cheek. But one is that, geez, the children need to have a good time. So, in the American development model, I talked about that. We say that it all starts with the fundamentals, and fun is actually capital F, capital U, capital M.
Mhm.
And if the basis of your sport experience is not fun, you're likely going to drop out. In fact, there's a 75% chance you're going to drop out at puberty. So that's the one thing. And, for the parents to understand that 7 and 8-year-olds are not miniature adults. They're 7 and 8-year-olds. So they have their own construct. And we need to understand that construct and let them explore. That's another. I think the other is that, being in a lesson where half the time you're just standing and doing nothing, kids want to run. If you actually just take kids and put them in a park and you don't have any, phones or videos or other opiate-like devices around, what they'll do is every 5 to 8 seconds, they're going to be in a new burst of activity.
Mhm.
That's what's natural for children. And so the whole idea is that they should be running around and having fun. And then as they become developmentally better, it's guiding them. But there's just such a slippery slope of living vicariously through them. And, and believe me, I've seen so much talent destroyed because of that, even at the professional level.
Mhm.
I've seen players whose fathers, quite frankly, and it was the fathers primarily, they were forbidden to come to tennis matches anymore.
Yeah.
But you could see it in a player's eyes, you could really look, and when you just see this blank stare and they're like spiritually not there anymore, you could predict they were going to have a serious injury or drop out within 6 months. And so I don't know. I don't have a magic bullet answer other than that, you know, I think just careful reflection about what's ultimately the goal. The goal is that your child has a meaningful human development. We should all be in the human development model of things, and you know, and then things will happen from there. You don't create champions with an idea of just, you know, winning matches. You create champions because you create incredible human beings.
Yeah, I think that's a great point there. And I think you mentioned it earlier with the parents. I don't think my parents came to a single sport. Maybe they came to like one or two, and I was never asked, "Did you win? Did you lose?" Like it was just sort of like, "Oh, did you have fun?" You know. And I think sometimes we, as a society, focus so much on that comparison and the winning and the losing, and so much pressure instead of just asking kids, "Did you have fun today? Did you enjoy it? Did you get to spend some time with your friends? And what did you learn?" Um, very well said, and hopefully we'll have some parents and young players listening to this that can do that type of reflection and think about how they can have more fun and develop humans.
Right, right.
So my last question is a biggie. It is, what more can we do at USTA to share the health benefits of tennis and make sure everyone has the opportunity to enjoy the sport of a lifetime?
You know, I'm actually looking to people like you, Laura, to help me answer that question. I think your leadership at USTA Florida has been so phenomenal, and you know, Florida is sort of, it's a great state to play tennis. But you know, Lucia and I were asking ourselves that same question. Lucia is the CEO of the USTA. And he said from his point of view, every time he is publicly speaking and mentions tennis, he's going to mention health benefits of tennis.
Great.
Um, I gave, it was interesting, just this past weekend, I gave one of the eulogies for Alan Schwartz. So Alan is a past president of the USTA, actually the 47th president of the USTA. I'm the 56th. And I knew Alan, and you know, I was kind of just talking to the packed audience there and was saying, you know, Alan would be happy to see that tennis is just taking off so much. And then I mentioned these studies and I said, you know, and that tennis is the healthiest sport on the planet. So I'm giving a eulogy. The entire congregation started clapping.
Oh, that's amazing.
And so I think we don't, it just has become kind of built in like a microchip in the brain that every time we say the word tennis, we're somehow talking about the health benefits, that we get that out at the clubs and in the parks. But I look to you and the other you know, section leaders and community leaders to come up with the best ideas on how to do that. And I think it may vary from section to section too, right? You know, what's the best way to message that?
Yeah, as you mentioned, we're very lucky in Florida. We're a year-round tennis play state. It's hard to believe you can come to our events in July and August, and we have league players out there playing 3 matches in like 95-degree heat, and they just love it. I mean, there's tennis play happening all the time, but we don't really speak as much about the health and wellness aspects of our sport, or the different things. I don't think we've done a great job of being advocates really for our sport. And we are going to try to do a better job. And this podcast obviously is a step in that direction. I hope that people will listen and maybe wow a few people with the type of growth and health benefits that, you know, genuinely we need to speak more to. And I appreciate you being that leader and doing more to help us communicate in that way, because I think you've done a fabulous job since coming on board in this role. And I think sharing with us, you did that at the leadership meetings in January, and I think that's the first time that had been done. So it was really nice to hear some of this information and be able to say, yeah, I can go back to my section and I can share that too.
Yeah, and we'll of course be emphasizing it at the annual meeting coming up in March. And again, I know you aren't going to forget, but I can't wait to see that video of your mother playing orange ball
You
tennis.
asked for it, you shall receive. She will be more than happy to, as long as I videotape it, she'll be more than happy to share. She's quite a human being, but I know we're out of time, and I appreciate you so much, Dr. Hainline. Thank you for all you've done for our sport and the different roles that you've played. Thanks for your leadership and what you are going to do. And of course, thank you for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
No, I appreciate it, Laura, and please know how much I appreciate you and having the opportunity to serve side by side with you.
My pleasure. For those of you who are listening to the audio only version of this podcast, be sure to check out USTA Florida's YouTube channel, where you can see the full video version. And of course, for all episodes of the Here to Serve podcast, including upcoming topics and dates, visit ustaflorida.com/here to serve. Thank you for tuning in, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Play some tennis.